So this time we get to interview each other. It's going to be like a therapy session. We love it.
Welcome back to Sillage and Sorcery, a podcast where two witches talk about all things fragrance from the vantage point of their craft. I guess we should introduce ourselves. My name is B. Sampson of Venus Invictus, and I'm joined with my lovely co-host,
Melissa Sifjardóttir of Sif Sniffs.
So if you are here listening, we are going to be doing interviews with each other and releasing them as we go, just so people can know a little bit more about us.
And I have prominent Leo placements, so people knowing a lot about me is something I'm very into, and I fully support. This is so weird because usually you start the first batch of questions for the interviews. And I do the fun ones, so I have to be like the serious person. I don't do that very well. So what inspired you to be a perfumer, and how did you get started?
Okay, well, I don't know if there was one single defining moment that was like, here's your inspiration, you want to do this. But I initially started out, for those of you that don't know, my partner used to co-own a witch shop in Brooklyn, in Bushwick, called Catland Books. And Catland was there a little over 10 years, but I was only there for part of it. And while I was there, one of the things that I was enjoying doing was I was making bath salts and foot scrubs and incense. And I found that through the preparation of all these natural materials and how fragrant they can be, especially when you add something like oil or you grind them up in a mortar and pestle, it was not the final product of like a bath salt or like the incense being burnt, but it was how the ingredients came together and the aroma that they produced that I fell in love with. And it was through that I was like, maybe I'll try making my own perfume. And so I started doing some research. I started off by making perfume oils because they're pretty easy to do. You can make a perfume oil with as little as 1 to 2 ingredients. That doesn't mean it's going to be good. Then, from there, people just started kind of requesting the perfume oils that I was making, and it just kind of grew from there.
And the first 5 were Dryad's Crown, Ophidian Relic, Verdant Arcadia,
Fields of Asphodel, and Temple of Bologna.
And what would you say is the ethos behind your brand?
I would say my ethos is kind of like, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's the one that's coming to mind. And it's jailbreaking the perfume industry, like making it more accessible to people, right? Because I think that everyone deserves to be able to smell good. And there's so much perfume currently in circulation that is inaccessible to the average, like working class person. So making sure that perfume is affordable is like the main thing for me. But also, I would say, my whole brand is inspired by Greek and Roman mythology. And there's so much about Greek and Roman mythology that's super queer. And as a non-binary person, I want to share these myths and these stories and carry them on. Because I don't know about you, but I've come across people being from Florida that have been like, non-binary? What in the woke bullshit? And it's like, we've been here for eons.
And if you are a podcast listener person, When God Was Queer is available.
Yes, When God Was Queer. It's so fun. My partner's super well-versed in Greek and Roman myths, so they would basically tell these myths to 2 other co-hosts who are both non-binary, and they would kind of like talk about it and dissect it. And my favorite thing that they would do is that they would like act out some of the scenes.
That's awesome. How do you stand out in a competitive market?
I think that a lot of that has to do with like your branding. And I feel like my main thing is, for me, like, put me in a room of people who are interested in perfume and I can sell my perfume. Like, I find that I do a lot better in person at events, at markets, at pop-ups than I do selling online, because people can't smell things through a computer, right? They need to like experience it. So I think just like, making sure that you're getting your name out there. One thing that I did that I think was super helpful was I went through a bunch of like TikTok influencers and sent them samples of my work to like smell and review. And that was pretty cool.
Can you talk us through your creative process and what it's like developing a new product?
Well, I think it really depends on my headspace at the time, but it's not the same always. Sometimes I will be reading about a myth and be very inspired to sit down and kind of pull from the myth to create the perfume. I have got a few perfumes where, like, if there is an ingredient or a fruit or a flower or an herb that's mentioned in the myth, I'll try to incorporate that into the perfume, which is fun to like play around. But other times I would say I'll just sit down and start blending and I'll come up with an idea, and then post blending I'll figure out who I want to pair it with in terms of mythology. But yeah, it varies. And sometimes, it does take me a while to make a perfume. I think the longest I've ever worked on a perfume was about 3 months.
I have one fragrance I've been working on since October of last year, and it's
Wow.
still not finished.
That's how it goes with this. Like, I tell people that, like, people ask me, they're like, how do you make perfume? And I'm like, well, it's a lot of chemistry. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of repetition. To me, in that way, it kind of reminds me of witchcraft. Like, you're performing a ritual or a spell over and over again until you get it right, So,
And tweaking and figuring out what works and what complements it and what doesn't work, and needing to go back to the drawing board on some things. So, on that note, is there any ingredients that you're obsessed with and find yourself returning back to?
there are a handful. There's definitely an ingredient that is one of my go-tos. That's such a hard question because I feel like there are staples that I usually end up putting in at least I don't know, more than half of my fragrances. There are certain things like some of these like designer molecules that I find that are super helpful for building a perfume, like ISOE Super or Timber Silk, or Ambroxan, Cashmeran, Bretellide. I think the one that I find myself gravitating towards when I need like a little buzz or like something a little extra, and I think that's cardamom essential oil. It's so good to me. It's one of my favorite smells, and I feel like it adds like warmth and spiciness without it being like overly peppery or spicy. I tell folks that it reminds me, like, when I smell it, I think of TV static
Okay, I can see that.
or like the buzzing of a bee.
How much does chemistry play a role in your work?
A lot, I would say. I think as perfumers, we are chemists and scientists, but I also think that we're artists as well. I think that I approach perfume from, I would say, more of an artist perspective first, and then science. And the science and chemistry is super important because there are a lot of regulations when it comes to perfume and fragrance. One of the most important things that I found out when I was first starting my journey was that there is something called the IFR, which, for those of you that don't know, is the International Fragrance Regulation Association. And they basically have a team of chemists and scientists that put out safety data sheets and reports on all of the ingredients that are out there for perfumery. And they will tell you, like, oh, this is a known allergen. You can only use 0.5% of this ingredient. So making sure that I have things like pre-diluted, making sure that the levels are correct is super important to me because I don't want to cause anyone a chemical burn or an allergic reaction. When I first started making perfume, I actually gave myself an allergic reaction. I got a rash from a perfume that I made. And then I realized that I used too much of a certain ingredient. So not fun, but I'm glad that it happened to me and not somebody else. Yeah. So trial and error, I think, yeah, I would say I'm a scientist for sure.
With changing regulations, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of blending fragrances? And how would you overcome something like that?
I think that the most challenging part of blending fragrances isn't the blending itself, it's the cost of materials. This is not a cheap industry to be in, like making perfume. It can add up pretty quickly. But I will say that if you're diluting your materials enough, then obviously you have more to work with. But yeah, I would say cost is probably the most troublesome part of what I do. I think that when it comes to blending and overcoming obstacles like ingredients being banned, I feel like for most of the ingredients that I have, there are certain things that are like very unique and special, but there are also a lot of alternatives as well. Like sandalwood is a big one. Sandalwood essential oil is very expensive, and there are so many alternatives to it, and each one smells a little different. Yeah, I don't know. I think that like you just adapt and you play around to see what works, and trial and error, I guess, is like the main thing for me. Is like I keep going back to these ingredients, and I feel like at this point I've been perfuming for about 5 years. At this point, I feel like I have substitutions in my head of like, okay, if I'm out of this, I can substitute this and it'll do a similar thing in what I'm going for.
Also, for those who are listening, usually stuff gets regulated out of like an abundance of caution. It's not necessarily like a known carcinogen. One of my hot takes is I hate clean because there's no technical definition for clean. So I do kind of feel like when we're talking about substitutions and talking about like things getting regulated, usually it's because say 5% of the population has a reaction to it. And that means 95% of the people out there have no response to it. We just want to be cautious and make sure that those 5% aren't having any kind of adverse reaction.
Well, talking about regulations, I personally, it's interesting looking at like the regulations in the United States versus the regulations in the like European Union. I follow the EU allergen list. So if you go on my Etsy and you look at the very bottom of each listing, there should be an ingredients list where I list the known allergens as according to the EU standards and not the US standards, because the list is like cut in half for the United States, which is wild to me.
What are your perfume hot takes? We touched on mine a little bit.
Perfume hot takes. Well, I don't know the like logistics or legality of like talking about a brand that is like super well known. I don't want to get sued because I don't have any fucking money.
So maybe to say a brand that is popular.
There is a brand that is popular. I don't like a single perfume that they make. That's probably my hot take. Okay, I have a hot take that some perfumers may not agree with. I think that as a perfumer, it is okay to use fragrance oils in moderation. Only, however, if you know what's in them and as long as they are phthalate free.
That's fair.
Yeah. Like for all of my perfumes, I make EDPs, but I do them on the lower end because I don't want my perfume to last super long. I think 4 to 6 hours is like the range that I personally like for a perfume, in case like I'm wearing something in the daytime and I want to switch it up at night and wear something different. I can do that, right? Without having to like take a shower, wash it off. I do have some perfumes that will last weeks if you spray it on clothes or whatever. I would say for the most part, like the lower end of the EDP spectrum. So that being said, if I'm using a fragrance oil, I'm not using a shit ton because my formula, like there's not much to it, right? But at the same time, I wouldn't use like a majority of fragrance oils. And of course, like I research all the fragrance oils that I use. So I know what's in them. Yeah, I think as long as you do your research and you are looking at like quality of the materials that you're working with and you're using some of these cheaper ingredients along with more like high-end professional ingredients, you can make something very special without having to like break the bank. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of smells that you just can't get when it comes to like aroma chemicals or essential oils. Like grass is one that like I have never found a way to get that as an aroma chemical. I have some stuff that's like a little close to it, but for the most part, like I have like a premium like grass fragrance oil that I use in moderation for some of my scents, and I love it.
Or ocean. I feel like ocean's so ambiguous too, that like if you're looking for a specific kind of sea by the beach, like getting the waft soaked from the water kind of a scent. That's also kind of hard to pin down.
Can be, for sure. Yeah, there's tons of things like that, like pumpkin pie or cinnamon bun or like any like dessert, like marshmallows or I don't know. Yeah, there's like a whole world out there. And like, while I do think that fragrance oils primarily belong in candles and like diffusers and stuff, I think that they can be used in like skin perfume as long as you know how much you're putting into a perfume and you don't overdo it.
And that they're skin safe, because a lot of the ones that
Yeah.
are designed for candles too are not skin safe.
Correct.
So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind as well. What advice would you give someone who wants to start their journey as a perfumer?
I would say my advice to you is to start out small. Start out small. Don't break the bank buying 400 ingredients because you may not even touch them all. Start out small. Start with maybe like 10 essential oils, 10 even fragrance oils, and then play around with it. See how the blending goes. Do your research on like safety limits for each one. Write it down. That's super important. For me, I have 2 perfume books. I have a working book that has like levels, like safety levels and percentages of dilutions in it. And then I have another one that's like my formulary of like, okay, this has 35 grams of this ingredient. This has zero point 0.6 grams of this ingredient. Yeah. And I would say also, if you're first starting out, start with drops. Doing it by like drop when you're making perfume is a great way to start out. Like start out with a few drops of each material and just see how it goes. Like also another good tip for the entry level perfumer's alcohol is a marketing gimmick to get you to spend more money on alcohol. You just need alcohol. Don't go for isopropyl alcohol because that's hand sanitizer alcohol and they're not different. It has a strong odor and will ruin your fragrance. Yeah, there's just like tons of little tips like that. Sometimes I teach perfume stuff like with Apocrypha, and I think I want to start doing that more. I recently was thinking about doing like a beginner's introduction to perfume making. So that I think will be in the works. But I've done like classes on like perfume literacy because there are so many like French words in perfume that like the average person has no clue what it is, like sillage, for example. So yeah, I think that like if you're just starting out, take it slow, take it one step at a time, read a few books. I think one of my favorite people that I've learned from, not personally, because I don't got money like that, but Mandy Aftel, she's a fantastic resource for people who are just starting out. She's got tons of books out there, which are fantastic to read. And she's made something super incredible that was super helpful for me when I first started out and still is helpful to this day. And that is the Aftel wheel, which is so cool. I feel like we've talked about this before.
Yeah, but I edited it out. So this time you want me to keep it, I'll keep it.
Keep it. So you are a therapist as well. What does this remind you of?
DBT is mostly where we use it, but the feelings wheel.
Very cool. I love that. So yeah, this is a wheel that Mandy Aftel created for perfumers. On the front is the wheel, kind of show like a close-up. So because she is a natural perfumer, she only deals with natural ingredients, so you won't find any aroma chemicals on here. And on the back, there's a list of top notes, middle notes, and base notes. So super helpful, especially if you're first starting out. So that's my advice.
Awesome. If you could create a scent for a fictional character, who would it be and what would it smell like?
I think that arguably someone could argue that I already do that.
That is true.
But if I'm thinking about like, well, I've done this before for a perfume exhibition, like a group show that I was a part of and I did do a historical like figure. But I would say if I could make a perfume for a character, it would probably be a horror villain, or creature. I would love to do like a Dracula perfume or like Nosferatu. And I think it would smell like dusty, like decrepit, vintage dried roses. I think it would smell like cobwebs and dusty dirt.
That's the entire vibes of zoologist's moth is dust and dirt.
So yeah, that would, and I would probably figure out how to make like a blood type of smell to go in it as well. But yeah, I think Nosferatu or Dracula perfume would be rad. There is a perfume company out there that does that, by the way. They do like horror perfumes, which is so cool to me. The one that I'm thinking of is so cool. I saw a TikTok randomly of this person reviewing these like horror perfumes. Like I think there was like Nightmare on Elm Street. I think there was like Jason, like Friday the 13th. And the coolest thing that I loved about it is that they come in a VHS.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's fucking cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's good branding and packaging.
We love that.
I'm a sucker for like a niche, like well thought out package.
All right, are you ready for the rapid fire?
Let's go.
Ba-bam. Favorite note to work with?
I would say my favorite note to work with would have to be ethyl maltol.
Oh, really?
I love sweets. I am a recovering diabetic, type 2. Yeah, I love sweet smells. I love sweet things. I love gourmand perfumes. And ethyl maltol, for those of you that don't know, is like a candy floss cotton candy smell. And it's so nostalgic and I love working with it.
What's your least favorite?
My least favorite ingredient to work with. I'm like looking at all the ingredients on my wall. I think aldehydes. Aldehydes are my least favorite ingredient to work with. Just all of them. They're very difficult to work with because you have to dilute them so much. And like if you go over even just a little bit, it'll completely destroy your perfume.
It's fair. They're finicky.
They are finicky. Yep. So probably aldehydes. And I would say maybe orris root. Orris is another smell that like anytime I smell it, I just smell like old lady lipstick from like the 40s and 50s, or like old lady perfume because they fucking put orris in everything. You have to work with it a certain way, otherwise it just smells like an old person.
For me, that's ylang ylang. I hate with a fiery passion ylang ylang.
I'm not the biggest fan of it. I do like how like minty it can be. I will say the coolest thing that I found out that I had no clue. I think I learned this maybe like a year or two ago. And that's the thing that I love about perfume is that you're always learning new things. I'm a student of life and I love learning. And especially when it comes to like smells and ingredients and chemicals and essential oils. So I found out that there are different qualities of ylang ylang. Like, of course there are, right? Because things can smell different depending on where they're grown. But how it's processed can also change that, right? So when you're buying ylang ylang essential oil, if you just buy ylang ylang essential oil, it's probably going to smell the same everywhere. However, there are different levels. So there's ylang ylang 2 and ylang ylang 3. And that's like kind of like the purity of the scent of ylang ylang. And I have ylang ylang 3 here, and it smells more minty and like kind of like cold and jasmine-y, as opposed to like regular ylang ylang, which I also think smells like shit.
Now, the last time we recorded this, you could not narrow yourself down to one. But if you were stranded on an island with one perfume, what would be your one perfume?
If I was stranded on an island
that's not your own.
That's not my own. Not me thinking of like, okay, what's toxic to wildlife and fish? What could I use to like trap animals? No, it would probably be Alien by Mugler. I love it. It's just like iconic. It's always been one of my favorite perfumes forever. Yeah, I love Mugler.
I love how you're like, wait, no, let's poison the
Let me
strains.
Poison the wildlife and then I'll be able to eat because I'm not good at hunting or fishing.
And I can only write help in the sand
How?
so many times.
Right.
Gosh, we're a mess. What do you think is the most overrated and underrated fragrance trend?
Well, this is fun. I think that the most overrated fragrance trend is very expensive perfume.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I don't think there's any reason for it. Like, I get it that some of these brands, like Chanel or like who the fuck ever, have like farms in like Guatemala where they're making their own patchouli oil. But like, come the fuck on. It's not necessary.
Okay. Yeah. I don't even think that's a hot take. That's like just facts.
Facts.
No notes.
Why are we breaking the bank for smells? Come on.
What do you think is an underrated fragrance trend?
Underrated fragrance trend. I think petrichor. Petrichor was like super popular in a lot of like these early 2000s perfumes, and it kind of like left the zeitgeist, but now it's coming back around. And I still feel like it's underrated though. I feel like you never see that smell, the smell of petrichor, in any like larger fragrance brand house. Yeah, I think it's underrated. It's such a unique smell that people know, right? Everyone knows the smell of rain, like, yeah, I just think it's so cool and it's so versatile and there's so many things that you can do with it. And I would love to see more of it in the world.
What's the first fragrance you fell in love with? I feel like it's Mugler, right?
It's,
no?
yeah, Alien. Yeah. Also, there was two that I was like competing with of like, oh, I want both of these. The other one was Burberry Brit for women. And this was like 2007, 2008. I'm sure they've changed their formula like since then, but yeah, that like classic. I also really was obsessed with this like shitty Hollister perfume. It came in like a little brown bottle. Hold on. It was called Jake.
There we go.
Jake by Hollister was my shit. Also, I just found one on eBay for $250. If I was smart, I would have saved mine. No, I loved it. It's that like classic, like Abercrombie, like when you go in, like they just fucking, yeah, I love that as well.
And what's a smell that you wish you could bottle but haven't figured out yet?
That's difficult. The smell of old books, antique books, like a used bookstore. There's a specific smell that happens to paper when it's aged and like compressed, and you can't get that smell anywhere. I've done so much research on it online, and people are like, oh, this chemical like kind of smells like it, but you can only get it like in the like chemical industry because it's an industrial solvent. And it's like, do you want to buy a kilo of this one thing? And it's like, no, I don't, because I don't have $700 for a kilo of this chemical. What? So I would say, yeah, the smell of old books. Yeah, that would be so cool.
And what do you have on the horizon? Because this is the pre-plug party. I'm going to do it like that every time.
Well, as it's starting to warm up, I am booking more markets. So if you are Philly local, find me at your local market. Follow my page for updates. I just recently launched a Venus perfume, which I'm so excited about.
It is lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make a Venus perfume because it's like, I've been in business for like, I've been making perfume for like 5 years. So like, I feel like I don't have a Venus perfume yet. So I thought it was time. So yeah, there's that. And then I do want to create a Epithets of Venus collection because there are many stories of Venus changing her appearance or persona depending on where she's kind of like worshipped in ancient times. And one of which I love so much, it's called Venus Barbata. It's where Venus grows a beard and she goes off to war. I'm like, the bearded Venus? Yes, please. I just think that's so cool. There's another one that's like, it's actually an epithet of, I believe, Aphrodite. Get specifically how to say it. I think it's like Agnimemos or something like that. But it's Aphrodite, the gravedigger. And there's also one that's Aphrodite, the killer of men. And I'm like, what are we doing? She's a baddie. She's here to destroy. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we're going to be at Philly Fair.
Yes, we are doing some fun Ren festivals. I'm excited. I've never done one.
I am a not real, but slight Ren Fair veteran. So, yeah, that's going to be fun because that's going to be the two of us together doing a fair. So, if you are a Philly local, our first one's going to be Philly Fair. It's by the Philadelphia airport. And it's Memorial Day weekend, so that's going to be a lot of fun.
Come and visit us and buy all the perfumes.
Absolutely.
I'm going to try to have discovery sets for it. I don't usually bring those to markets.
Well, this was a fun episode. Are you ready to
Yeah.
change and record the next one where we talk about me?
Let's do it.